Hi, I'm Dr. Doug Graham, the author of the 80-10-10 Diet, and I'd like to give you a brief overview of what that's about. The concept of 80-10-10 is a relatively simple one. It's simply about the caloronutrient ratio, how much protein, how much carbs, how much fat in relationship to each other. And I usually express this in terms of carbohydrates, proteins, and fat. Primarily I use that order because the proteins in most people's diet don't change much. The amount of protein, some people might eat high single digits and some people might eat low 20%. But most people in the world eat in the teens in terms of their protein intake. And so I use this number as the fulcrum because it's carbohydrate and fat intakes that really can vary dramatically from diet approach to diet approach. What I noticed both in my schooling as a nutritionist and as a doctor, but also out in private practice and in my research looking at what people did in the world of sports nutrition, was that the higher the carbohydrate intake, the better people seem to do health-wise. We found that when carbohydrate intake exceeded 80% of calories consumed, that the amount of heart disease, diabetes, candida, colitis and digestive disorders, a host of issues, including overweight and arthritides, autoimmune conditions, just an endless stream, it seemed, of issues, basically went away. There are books on reversing heart disease that are designed around eating more than 80% of calories from carbohydrates. A number of health retreats and health professionals created their program where they reduce fat intake down into the single digits and allow carbohydrate intake to go up into the 80s, leaving protein basically unmentioned. And what I realized through running my own health retreat through the 80s and into the 90s was that if we did the exact same thing but used raw foods as our calorie source instead of cooked foods, that we got even better results. And so I ended up with proposing the 80-10-10 diet, which is simply a diet where more than 80% of your calories come from carbohydrates and fewer than 10% from protein or fat. In terms of the results that we tend to expect on 80-10-10, people pretty much unanimously tell us that they start thinking more clearly, they have more energy, their health conditions resolve, they drop weight if they have weight to lose, and they have the energy to do the strength exercises required to gain weight should they so desire. Pretty much what we're seeing is just astonishing positive results that can be supported through the research done primarily in the sports sciences, where they're showing us that the uptake, transport, and delivery of oxygen to the cells improves when total fat intake goes down under 10%, and that it's impaired or compromised as fat intake rises. Not how fat you are, but how much fat is actually in your food every day. What percentage of total calories is in your food? Where the average American is eating about somewhere in the 40% of their calories from fat. The average raw fooder is eating between 60 to 80% of their calories from fat, primarily on a diet of fat and grass, condiments, and supplements. If they shun fruit, they've got no carbohydrate source, and then they start going to refined carbohydrates or sweeteners to add to their otherwise fat and grass fare. It's not a program that tends to work, hence we've seen a host of raw fooders come out in the last few years saying that in fact they couldn't stay raw or they couldn't stay vegan. And they didn't usually say it that way. They usually say, well, we had to go, body needed something. What it needed was what they weren't getting. What I'm finding is that when people go on 80-10-10, not only can they sustain it, but their health improves and they don't want to go anywhere else. And so we're seeing 80-10-10 becoming the largest growing and fastest growing segment of the raw food population, because people do it and they stick with it. But the sports scientists show us that the uptake, transport, and delivery of carbohydrates improves as fat intake goes down. And so we can relate this uptake and transport and delivery of oxygen and carbohydrates to sports performance. We know that if you can't get enough oxygen to the cells, they have a tendency towards going carcinogenous. The cancers can develop. We've seen that if you can't get the carbohydrates out of your bloodstream, that then you're tending towards diabetes. If there's too much fat in the bloodstream, you're tending towards heart diseases. It just didn't seem to matter. The research has come out again and again and again supportive of 80-10-10.